Astrology is flashing warning signs about the potential for a big financial crisis in the near future. But this won't just be any old crash. Down the line, it could well lead to a complete overhaul of the monetary system itself. Like it or not, the powers that be have decided that money is going digital. The question really isn't if, it's when. But sweeping changes like this don't appear at random. There are cyclical rhythms to history and to change to financial, economic, and monetary systems. Major long-term cycles are showing that the time is almost ripe for a fundamental change to the way that money works in our world. And of course, it will have everything to do with the US dollar, which has been the global reserve currency since the 1940s, when the Bretton Agreement established its primacy. But there are also more short-term factors suggesting that a crisis that could facilitate such a change could arrive in the next few weeks or months. In this video, I'm going to break down the cyclical factors that point to massive changes to the global economy and the financial system and the very way that money itself functions. We're going to look at long-term cyclical factors, but stick through this video to the end because I'm also going to tell you about something happening in the sky later this year that points to an emergent financial crisis. This is World Astrology Report. I'm your host, Dan Waits, and get ready for another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. If you enjoy the content I make on this channel and want to register your support, please do give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and enable notifications so that you don't miss future videos. And do consider becoming a member of World Astrology Report either at worldastrologyreport.com or here on YouTube itself. Each of my videos, including the one you're watching right now, has an extended version for members in which I go deeper into the material or I cover more controversial topics that the algorithmic gods don't like. You can sign up as a member here on YouTube and watch those videos here, or you can sign up as a member on my website, which I think offers better value for money. There you'll get access to all those videos, as well as invitations to my exclusive monthly long-form live streams, where we go way deeper into astrology, history, and the future. The last one was my big picture forecast for the rest of the 2020s, and it clocks in at more than 3 hours long. Signing up on the website also gives you access to my private forum, where you can reach out to me with your ideas and exchange with other fans of the channel. So if you want the full World Astrology Report experience, head to the website, but if you just want to stay here on YouTube and watch exclusive ad-free content, then there is now an option for you to do just that. Thanks for listening, and now back to the video. First of all, a quick note, since this video has to do with finance, astrology reveals patterns and probabilities, not certainties. This video is for entertainment purposes only, and nothing in it should be considered financial advice. Do not make financial decisions based on this video, and as always, do your own research. Now, let's start with an important question, one that has troubled astrologers for centuries. Do the planets cause changes on Earth, or do they merely signify them? I don't think we know the answer to this question for sure. My take is that matter naturally arranges itself according to certain geometries. Think of the golden ratio and its appearance in nature and biology. Think of the way that electrons arrange themselves in shells according to their energy levels. The planets are arranged according to natural geometries too. The Titius-Bode law, which predicts the spacing of the planets, was successfully used to predict the positions of the asteroid belt and Uranus well in advance, based purely on maths and geometry. The controversial claim that astrology makes is that the appearance of meaningful events in time is congruent with these same natural geometries that we see in nature and in the solar system. We all know that many organisms and systems of nature follow the rhythm of the lunar cycle, including human beings, but astrology extends this claim to the other planets. The planets represent different energies that we experience in our lives. The energy of attraction, Venus, the energy of limitation, Saturn, and so on. And so the planets are arranged according to their energetic levels and certain geometry, just like electrons in their shells. The universe is fractal and cyclical at all levels. And in this video, we're going to consider one of the major rhythms of history, the Uranus cycle. Uranus takes roughly 84 years to orbit the Sun. This planet is associated with revolution, disruption, sudden realizations and inspiration, technological leaps, freedom and authenticity. Every 84 years or so, a person or system or institution experiences a Uranus return, which is when Uranus returns to the position it was in when they were born. And this will tend to be experienced as a significant shift or reset, a time when sclerotic systems or those that no longer serve their purpose are disrupted and renewed. Now, the United States was born out of the Revolutionary War at a time when Uranus was in the sign of Gemini. Whenever Uranus returns to Gemini, the US has engaged in another transformative conflict. First the Civil War, then World War II. This is one reason why astrologers are a bit worried about Uranus returning to Gemini, which it's doing in July this year. And war isn't the only thing to be concerned about, because these same periods of Uranus in Gemini also seem to bring sweeping changes to how money itself works in the United States. Uranus spends an average of 7 years in each of the 12 zodiac signs over the course of its 84-year cycle. If we look at the history of the United States, we see that something significant seems to happen with the US monetary system whenever Uranus is in the sign of Gemini. Gemini is one of two signs ruled by Mercury, the messenger of the gods, the planet of communication, interpretation, the rational mind, and trade. Think of the words merchant and mercantile. Now, to understand this pattern, we have to go back in time and examine the previous times when Uranus was in Gemini. Uranus was last in that part of the zodiac from 1941 to 1948, an extremely disruptive period in history, as I probably don't need to explain. But in case I do, well, this was when the Second World War was fought and won, and when the world we live in today emerged from the ashes. This was when the US really emerged as a global superpower, along with the Soviet Union, when the world was essentially split in two. Uranus was in Gemini, the sign of the twins. Now, in July 1944, near the end of the Second World War, came a landmark financial deal known as the Bretton Woods Agreement. This agreement essentially established the US dollar as the world's global reserve currency and laid the foundations of the modern international monetary system. Countries around the world agreed to peg their currencies to the US dollar, which would be convertible to gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. This was, of course, a titanic shift for the global economy and for the US itself. Now, in 2028 and 2029, we'll see the exact Uranus returns of the Bretton Woods Agreement. But once Uranus enters the sign of Gemini in July, we'll likely start to see events that set up a shake-up to the global financial system. And of course, we arguably already have this year with the Trump tariffs. Now, you might think, okay, that's just one historical example. I want to see more to be convinced there's any kind of pattern. Let's head back in time another Uranus cycle of 84 years. Uranus was also in Gemini from 1858 to 1865, which covers the period of the US Civil War. So once again, we find the US at war with Uranus in Gemini. To finance that war, the US government began issuing paper money called greenbacks, which were authorized by the Legal Tender Act of 1862. This was essentially the period when the United States' national banking system came into being, with the National Banking Acts of 1863 and 1864. These acts essentially aimed to create a stable and uniform national currency. Greenbacks were a fiat currency. They weren't backed by real assets like gold, and they ended up resulting in huge levels of inflation. The national debt of the US soared in this period from $65 million in 1860 to $2.7 billion by 1865. The point here, though, is that with Uranus in Gemini, once again, we saw a transformative moment for the US financial and monetary system. And if we go back yet another Uranus cycle, we find the same thing, the US at war and seminal events that have to do with the country's financial system. Going back another cycle, Uranus was in Gemini from 1774 to 1782. Yes, that coincides with the period of the outbreak of the Revolutionary War, or the War of American Independence, as we call it in Britain, as well as the Declaration of Independence of 1776. And this was also a massively important period for US currency, as you might expect, given that this was really when the US was born as an independent entity. Before the war broke out, the US used a mix of British pounds, local colonial currencies, and barter. But on April 19th, 1775, came the first battles of the Revolution at Lexington and Concord. Where was Uranus on that date? Well, it was in Gemini. Uranus, Gemini, and the US at war. Unfortunately, it seems to be a pattern. Now, in 1775, the Continental Congress began issuing a new currency known as Continental Dollars to finance the Revolutionary War. Since the Congress didn't have the authority to levy taxes, it didn't really have much to back this currency. It printed some $240 million by 1780, and the currency eventually became almost completely worthless. Sound familiar? Yes, it's extremely similar to what happened one Uranus cycle later, when the government printed another fiat currency, the greenback, to finance a war, one that eventually became worthless. The continental dollar didn't succeed as a currency, but it did lay the groundwork for the US dollar that was later established permanently by the Coinage Act of 1792. To summarize though, whenever Uranus is in Gemini, we see transformation of the US monetary system. And Uranus is about to move into Gemini once again on July the 7th. At some point while Uranus is in Gemini, I am pretty sure the US is going to press reset on its currency in some way. Uranus will be in Gemini until 2033, so this is a pretty wide window, but I suspect major change is coming a lot sooner than that, and I think a new financial crisis could be brewing. And to understand why, we have to understand a particular point in the zodiac, one that carries the sense of descent into the underworld and crisis. We have to get a little more esoteric now to understand where we're going in this video. We're going to have to understand how the tropical zodiac itself actually works. Vedic astrology is anchored to the stars, to the constellations themselves, but for the most part, Western astrology uses the tropical zodiac, which is defined by the seasons and specifically by the sun's annual journey along the ecliptic over the course of the year, which has as its major milestones the two solstices and equinoxes. In the Northern Hemisphere, the year can be said to begin at the spring equinox around March the 20th, when the length of the days and nights are equal. At that moment, the sun enters the first sign of the zodiac, Aries, and from that time onwards, the days grow longer and the nights shorter. Now at the summer solstice, when the sun enters Cancer around June the 21st, the days reach their longest, light has triumphed fully over darkness. And yet, this is the moment when the days actually begin to retreat and the nights lengthen. We reach the second equinox of the year, the autumn equinox, around September the 22nd. Once again, the nights and days are of equal length, but now darkness takes over from light, and we enter the half of the year in which darkness predominates. This is the moment when the sun moves from the sign of Virgo to Libra. For another 3 months, the nights steadily grow and the days decline until we reach the winter solstice around December the 21st. At this point, the nights are at their longest, the days at their shortest, and darkness has thoroughly triumphed over light. This is when the sun enters the tropical sign of Capricorn. Now, it's the autumn equinox that we need to focus on here. Remember, this is the moment when the sun moves from the sign of Virgo to Libra, and when we enter the half of the year in which darkness dominates. And so the sun's transition from Virgo to Libra is symbolic of a descent into the underworld, when, according to countless spiritual traditions, the soul is judged. Libra is the sign of the scales. In ancient Egyptian religion, the goddess of justice, Ma'at, used scales to weigh the hearts of the dead against a feather and judge their worthiness. So Libra is judgment and the assessment of value. But Virgo is the sign that comes before judgment, before the descent into the underworld, before symbolic death. This is why Virgo is associated with a need for constant self-improvement and analysis and with critical thinking. Virgo is aware that judgment is coming, and so it wishes to render itself fit to pass the tests of Ma'at. But more so than most degrees of the zodiac, the last degree of Virgo carries the sense of crisis. It's the moment of descent into the underworld an imminent judgment of worth. Virgo is an earth sign that also has to do with the natural world, as well as the intricate technical systems that make the human world function. It's associated with work itself and with technical knowledge and specialization. Now, let's go back to our theme of financial crisis and transformation. In astrology, Pluto is the body we associate with transformation through crisis. Pluto, mythologically, is the lord of the underworld. It signifies processes of death and rebirth, the moments when we descend to the depths and then re-emerge transformed. It's also the planet of big money. Wealth was traditionally something that came from out of the ground, from the underworld, in the form of precious metals and jewels. And so Pluto is about great power and wealth. Think of the word plutocrat. In physical terms, Pluto is a small body, not even considered a planet anymore. Most astrologers will tell you it exercises an immensely powerful influence, one that's almost inversely correlated with its size and distance from the sun. Now, in 1971, Pluto reached the final degree of Virgo, this point of descent into the underworld, this potent degree of existential crisis. And what happened that year? Well, 1971 was the year of the Nixon shock. We already saw how the Bretton Woods system emerged in 1944, and the US dollar was established as the global reserve currency and made exchangeable with gold. But by 1971, the US was running large trade and budget deficits, and its gold supplies were dwindling. Other countries began demanding to exchange their dollars for gold reserves, which had been fixed at the rate of $35 per ounce. But the US didn't have enough gold to exchange for the dollars in circulation. So to prevent a run on the dollar and to preserve stability, the US President Richard Nixon announced that he would suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold. Bretton Woods was over, the dollar had become a fiat currency, its value was no longer backed by gold. And things worked out pretty well for the US since then, at least until recently. It's long had the ability to service its debts simply by printing new dollars without needing gold to back them. So with Pluto, the planet of transformation through crisis, in the final degrees of Virgo, we saw a massive transformation in the global monetary system. Now, we all know that there's a lot of noise these days about the vast size of the US national debt and the question of whether the US dollar can survive as global reserve currency. We're seeing geopolitical rivals in the BRICS grouping trying to move away from the dollar in trade and reserves. And we're also hearing that the US itself is looking into using blockchain and specifically stable coins to establish a new monetary system. A lot of analysts are suggesting a massive shift in the financial system is looming. Of course, you don't need astrology to know all of this. But guess what? That crucial, final, critical degree of Virgo is in the firing line once again. There's something happening in that degree this year, something you'll want to know about. Solar eclipses are signifiers of great change. This is something that's been known to astrologers for thousands of years. An eclipse is like the moment in a theatre play when the lights go off and the set is changed. When the light returns, everything looks different. Timing the effects of eclipses is quite tricky. We often see their effects up to about 3 months before they appear in the sky, and their effects can last for up to 3 years afterwards. When we look back in history, we find that major events can almost always be linked to one eclipse or another. Now, we've been talking about the final degree of Virgo as a place of great crisis for the material systems that we rely on in the world. On September the 21st this year, very close to the exact autumn equinox, we'll see a solar eclipse in that very degree. What does that promise for the global economy? Well, to get a better idea of that, we're going to look back in history once again and consider what happened when we've seen solar eclipses in this degree before. Eclipses obey certain geometrical patterns and cycles. One of them is what's called the Metonic cycle, and it lasts 19 years. Eclipses that occur within 19 years of each other occur in the same degrees of the zodiac. So let's consider what happened the last time there was an eclipse in the last degree of Virgo. This was 19 years ago, September the 22nd of 2006. This was right about the time that certain analysts and investors started to realize that something was going very wrong with the US mortgage industry. On September the 6th of 2006, this story appeared in the New York Times entitled "Mortgages Grow Riskier investors are attracted. It says this: "Yet even as analysts and officials have been ringing warning bells about exotic mortgages for months, and fresh housing data has indicated that the risks are rising, investors have seen little reason to abandon the bonds backed by these home loans. To the contrary, they have increased their exposure to the securities." We all know what happened soon after this: the subprime mortgage crisis, the greatest financial crisis of our lifetimes. And it was sparked by loose lending practices in the mortgage industry, as well as the sheer complexity of the financial system, think Virgo, and reckless behavior by banks. Now, let's head back another 19 years, because there was another one of these eclipses in the last degree of Virgo on September the 23rd of 1987. Markets were getting very volatile at the time of this eclipse, and less than a month later, on October the 19th of 1987, came the Black Monday crash, when stock markets around the world crashed dramatically and suddenly. The US's Dow Jones dropped 22.6% in a single day, the largest percentage drop in a single day ever. What caused the crash? Well, many things, but one of the major factors was the use of computerized trading strategies, which were designed to sell stocks automatically when prices dropped to limit losses. These tools amplified selling pressure. They caused a feedback loop and a massive drop in markets in a very short period of time. Remember, Virgo is a sign of technicalities and complex systems. So looking at the Metonic cycle, we can see that the September eclipse could bring a bad time for markets. But before we wrap this up, there's another way that eclipses are linked together in families. They're called the Saros series, which are families of eclipses with similar geometry that occur sequentially over hundreds of years. The September eclipse is from Saros series 154. And if we look back in time at previous eclipses from this family, we see more dramatic events having to do with the financial system. Close to the last one in September of 2007, French bank BNP Paribas blocked withdrawals from 3 hedge funds that had large exposure to subprime mortgages, signaling the beginning of the Great Financial Crisis. Going back 18 years again, in 1989, President George H.W. Bush signed into law the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery and Enforcement Act to try to rescue the US savings and loans industry, which had caused another massive crisis. And going back 18 years again, we saw an eclipse in this Saros series in August of 1971. That's the very month of the Nixon shock, which we've already looked at in this episode. This is when Richard Nixon announced the US would no longer convert dollars into gold at a fixed value, ending the Bretton Woods system. So we're starting to see a confluence of factors here. In the bigger picture, represented by Uranus in Gemini, we're entering a period of a few years when we can expect to see some sort of reset to the US monetary system. And in the smaller picture, considering this eclipse, we see resonances that link us to various financial crises and indeed to the Nixon shock itself. Given the nature of the zodiacal sign of Virgo, we might also predict that whatever comes will have to do with complex technical systems and their failure. We saw that with the Black Monday crash and the subprime crisis. Another possibility I could see is something around hacking or cyber warfare. And there's something more before we go. If we look at the natal chart of this eclipse, we can see that it's closely triggering something else of great importance that's happening in the sky right now. A conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in the very first degree of the whole zodiac, something that hasn't happened in all of recorded history as far as I can tell. I've made a lot of videos about this conjunction, including this live stream available for members on my website at worldastrologyreport.com. The eclipse of September is closely opposing this conjunction. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction is a depressive indicator for global sentiment and markets. Saturn signifies blocks and limits, while Neptune is the oceanic planet of global flow, things like global trade and liquidity. As this conjunction has been forming, we've already started to see indicators that the global trade network is breaking down. Think of the Houthis attacking shipping in the Gulf in solidarity with Gaza and essentially forcing cargo ships to divert away from the Suez Canal. And think of the Trump tariffs, which were essentially barriers to global trade. The September eclipse is triggering this Saturn-Neptune conjunction in a big way. Could it be that we're looking at some sort of crisis that's downstream of the Trump tariffs, or that has to do with problems in trade flows or liquidity? Let's see. Solar eclipses come into effect on the world stage about 3 months in advance of when they actually happen. So from around mid-June, we could start seeing events that are related to that solar eclipse in September. If a financial crisis is coming, it could hit us as early as then. That said, it could come closer to the eclipse itself. And bear in mind that eclipses are really harbingers of greater change. They're like moments when doors are opened for the new to pour into the world over the following months and years. So it could be that what we see around the time of this eclipse are the first signs that the global financial system is on shaky ground and that the full crisis comes later. We're almost certainly going to see profound changes to the monetary system in the next few years while Uranus is in Gemini. Countries around the world are developing central bank digital currencies. In Donald Trump's United States, it looks like the approach to creating this new digital system will rely on stable coins run by banks, but the fundamentals are basically the same. Whoever rules this planet wants us to transition to using digital currencies. A digital currency system could allow states to know every transaction that we're making, or apply measures to force us to spend money within a certain period of time, or restrict where we can spend money, or even prevent us from transacting at all if you happen to be on their shit list. A lot of people are worried about CBDCs, and in my opinion, quite reasonably so, which is why these systems are likely to be pushed on the back of a crisis. I think the solar eclipse of September the 21st this year could be signifying that very crisis's emergence. Money is power, and the planet of power, Pluto, is also telling us some extremely interesting things about what's going on now and which periods of history these events are in resonance with. In the full version of this video, available ad-free to members of World Astrology Report, whether on YouTube or at worldastrologyreport.com, we're going to look at what the Pluto cycle is telling us about the current moment and why what we're seeing really boils down to the Plutonian themes of power and control. That's almost it for this video. If you enjoyed it and you want to know more about the astrology of 2025, then I suggest you watch this video, which summarizes some of the big shifts on the way in this landmark year. Thanks for watching, and see you again soon.